Hi, this is Nicole from Tip That Scale. You're getting ready to listen to episode 29 titled Opposing Views. And you should know, yes, this is part one. So, why do we have two parts? Because when you have opposing views, there tends to be much, much more to discuss. Have a listen. The writers and now the actors are on strike. It's such an interesting time.
People are overworked and feel like they're underpaid. What's the reason behind it? I'm sorry, I haven't
Yeah.
really been watching a lot of TV or even paying attention to the news. There's just a lot
It's
of
stop.
negativity in the world right now. And on
It's
top of
stall.
that, it feels like they're just not giving us the information that we need, but they're just trying to gain views. The news isn't the news anymore. The news is just a bunch of stupid crap that nobody it's like they're trying to hide the fact. Talk about the stuff that's going on, the real issues that are here in the country. Talk about the real issues that are going on globally. Like talk about those types of things. Report on actual news. Stop giving us bullshit.
That is news to some people
Yeah.
because of their view, what they want to see. It's important to recognize that. I know you've talked about this before, but in thinking about what's really important to individual people and knowing that it changes and it's different for everyone. A lot of people want what they want the way they want it, and they don't necessarily care about anybody else.
The news just seems more like gossip than it does anything else, to be honest. It's not current affairs, it's just gossip. And what are the actors striking about? Feel like they're not getting paid
So
enough?
writers went out on strike first, and they've been on strike for a while. Now SAG after went out on strike as well for the same reason. It is about pay. And it makes sense. They're striking for money, for pay, especially in lieu of the amount of streaming services. The studio or the heads of these streaming services are still making a really big penny. They're
Oh
making a
yeah,
lot of money.
100%.
We tend to mention capitalism at least once in an episode, but it is interesting to see that creators are not getting paid. We do see those who are behind are getting paid a lot of money.
Well, capitalism and socialism, if you think about it, right? Like, do we really live in a capitalistic environment?
Yeah, we do.
I think it's capitalist for certain individuals or certain people, but for the vast majority, no, it's not. I mean, if you think about it, right? Like, could you put yourself in a capitalistic environment? You have the potential to. But when you talk about the mass majority of the people, I always like to revert back to the flow of money. And the reason I say that is when you give an individual the ability or a group of individuals to control 99% of all wealth, like 1% of individuals controlling 99% of wealth, that's
Mhm.
not necessarily capitalistic. Let's talk about inflation for a minute. During the Great Depression, we had 25% of the world not the world, but the US that was unemployed. The average income around that time, I think I saw an article where it was talking about like $4,000 and some odd change. During that time, $4,000, the average income for an individual, if you take into account inflation, that's close to like $90,000 a year. The average individual is what they were making. The average individual today makes roughly 60. We're not even keeping up with inflation. On top of that, you see people of wealth getting even wealthier. It's the same type of stuff that was going on during the Dark Ages. That's the same type of stuff that was going on, during monarchies and things like that. I mean, I'm not saying we live in a communist environment, but it is more socialist,
How's it
100%.
how's it more socialist? And maybe
Because if you
maybe
think about
we're looking at it from two different perspectives of what
it,
socialism and capitalism are.
it is, but you're talking about moving into an environment where individuals are talking about everybody deserves everything, everybody deserves this. That's not necessarily true. And here's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about rights or any of that other stuff. But I would say over the last 5 to 10 years, let me step back. Over the last 5 to 10 years, if you think about the way that things have been moving and the things that have been transpiring, a lot of these issues weren't necessarily issues. And the reason they weren't issues is because most people really didn't give a crap. Not about like what your personal rights are and all that. No, it just wasn't a thought. It wasn't like, oh wow, I don't come out and say it. And this is just maybe from my point of view, but like, let's just talk about this entire look at me movement that's happening right now. It's turned more into the individualistic mindset than it has, what's going on as a whole. That's why you see a lot more people that are extremely, this is probably going to get me in trouble. They're very self-centered, and they don't care what happens to the individual next to them as long as they're gaining. And the reason is that they've felt over the last however many years that they've just been overlooked. And I mean, I don't blame them. The middle class today is slowly and steadily turning into the lower middle class versus what it was. Like, we're just not in the same position that we were 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
I want to go back to a couple of things you said. When you're saying that we didn't have the same issues, we always had the issue. It's just who was talking about it and who was being heard and how was it amplified. And I think that's a big portion of where we're having a lot. We talked about the news earlier, a lot more that looks like noise, but what it is different groups are starting to speak out about things that other people don't care about, because if it doesn't apply to them, they are going to fight against it, or they're going to minimize it to say, oh, that's not happening. So from that perspective, we were talking about capitalism versus socialism. I do want to talk about the Look at Me movement as well, because I think the Look at Me movement is what you're calling a movement stems from capitalism. And when I say capitalism, what I'm talking about is I'm looking at the economic structure. So when you're talking about that 1%, how are we positioned to focus on money, focus on purchasing, focus on buying, focus on production, so there could be more buying? Amazon, over 2 days for their Prime days, they made $12.7 billion. From a socialist standpoint, a capitalist standpoint, there's a small group that benefits from those purchases. That's a capitalist. That's what I'm talking about from an economic standpoint. From a socialist standpoint, it's more equally
distributed.
Right, exactly. So that's what I'm talking
saying
about.
That's what everybody is wanting to move towards.
I don't know that everyone wants, but you said we're more of a socialist than capitalist.
Mindset. Yes, in a mindset standpoint. And what I'm saying is that people are wanting to move more towards that. And then there's a lot more government involvement now than there was even in the past. That's socialism. Like, more and more individuals are like, I deserve this, and I deserve this, and I should have more pay because of this, and I should have this. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and what I mean by capitalism, that there's a certain group of individuals that do control 99% of the wealth, but the vast majority of people want to move into that and say, I deserve this because I just exist. That's socialism. And that's essentially what's happening.
I think and I wrote this down, you said deserves. And I don't know that that's the right, from my perspective, I don't know that that's the right word, because, and a lot of things, because if the government was really more socialist, then we would see more equitable, more equality, more equity across everyone. We don't see that. That doesn't exist.
I didn't say the government was more socialist. I said it's moving more and more towards it. They're getting more and more involved with each individual's lives. Like, if you think about what happened in Dallas with the Airbnb thing, and it's starting to happen in other parts of the country. They struck down the entire fact that nobody could have any more Airbnbs. Why not? No explanation given. I understand the perspective of why. It's because they can't charge property taxes on businesses, because it goes under a different tax liability at the same point, because it's actually a revenue generating product at that point. And at the same time, there's not enough housing being sold versus renting. So there's no property tax or sales tax that they're gathering from that as well. So the government's losing a lot of money from it. I get it.
I still see it differently, though, because I see it that there's always someone else that is not the government. There's someone else from a capitalist perspective that's pulling the strings and saying this is what should happen. And it's not from a socialist standpoint. It's for that top 1% that is managing or has the level of wealth. I always think about it that it's somebody else that's behind it. The government, Yeah, they want their taxes, but also there's someone else that's where lobbyists come in. You always have someone who's lobbying to get people on your side that's going to make you more money.
It's
That's what,
correct.
but see, I don't think that people feel like they deserve. I think there's so much that, and we talk about it in looking for a job. When you put into something, you want your due. You want
Yeah.
what you feel is yours, or what you feel you should have because of what you bring to the table, what you've done. When you said deserves, I'm thinking, is it deserves, or is it the same thing that we've been talking about and we've been seeing, that people feel that they haven't gotten that, where they've been on the outside and they're still on the outside, and that there's no one that cares or is looking out for their best interests.
No, I can see that. I mean, hell, dealing with that for like 8 months. I mean, I'm not dealing with that specifically because I've got a lot of good people around me, but like I do understand what you're saying. But there still is a lot of people that do feel that and I want to use the word deserve is because they've come out and said it. I deserve this. I deserve this. It's
Mhm.
all over the news. It's all over like all kinds of publications, and it blows my mind.
When they say they deserve, what are their reasonings behind? Because I've never really heard that I deserve this. So I'm interested to have an understanding as to why, and what was driving it.
It's mainly from a lot of individuals that feel that they've been wronged or that they're not being heard, or it's a lot. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I've stayed off the news, and that's why I even try to stay off of social media at this point. And I don't know if it's a cry for help or if it's a look at me. And it may be a
Hmm.
little bit of both, to be completely honest. It's just I've always grown up with the mindset of work for what you want.
Hmm.
And put in the time and eventually you'll get there. And it doesn't necessarily mean just work hard, but work smart. It's just, I don't know. I
So
think that the way that, huh? Go ahead.
I understand that mindset, because I think we're all really taught that. We're taught to work hard, work smart, and you will be rewarded for that work. Now the issue though is that, that's where you said eventually it'll come. But the issue though is that a lot of people have worked. They've worked hard. They've worked
Yeah,
smart, and they haven't gotten that promise. I mean,
it's
that
true.
mindset. So then now they're kicking it out of that mindset. Like, what the hell? This is what was. It's like the idea of the American dream.
Mm,
And I
I
don't
have a lot
even
of viewpoints
know.
on that, but
Huh?
yeah,
No. I don't want to go into it, but there's this belief that, oh yes, the American dream. But whose dream, first of all, whose dream is it? And is that dream available to everyone? And so you put it out there that you work for what you want, work hard, work smart. And we even talked about this in the last episode. You have people who are in positions that are working hard, they're working smart, and they're never promoted because there's somebody else that wants to keep them in that position because they work hard and work smart. We think about how parents talk to their kids. If you do this, then this will happen. And a lot of kids will come back, well, mama, daddy, this didn't happen. You lied to me. They don't necessarily say that because parents don't. I know my parents don't play that. But then it becomes a lie. Then people feel like they've been wrong. I think back to a lot of people, this was probably 20 plus years ago, who, with one of the major downturns, people were putting a lot of money into their 401ks, into their pensions. And then again, we talked about blind trust, one of my favorite phrases. People blind trusted the company and whoever the company selected to manage their funds for them. And then all of a sudden, they've worked hard and then there's no money for them. We've gotten away from, if I put in, then I'm going to get something in return, because what we've learned is, number one, that doesn't happen. And number two, there are a lot of people that don't care about me putting in, me contributing, and me getting something in return for my contribution. We see that in companies quite a bit, where we see a lot of people, part of a great resignation, part of quiet quitting. A lot of people are seeing and putting into a lot, but they aren't getting anything in return. And that promise is broken. And you even talked about it. That promise is broken when they lay you off, when you don't get a raise, when you don't get promoted. So I don't think it's just the deserves part. That's where people do feel that they've been wrong. And more importantly, that they've been lied to. In the midst of that lie, somebody else is benefiting greatly and benefiting greater financially and all the others than the smaller person who's contributing. That's where I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, nah, I still think that a lot of people feel that they deserve certain things. It's not, I'm not trying to be any kind of way about it, but it's just, and again, this is just, it comes from my own views and my own opinion. It's just how I grew up. There are certain times in your life where you go through something, right? And you're meant to learn a lesson from it. And that doesn't necessarily mean just start pointing the finger at someone else, because a lot of the things could have been caused by your own mistakes. And then there are certain situations that you had nothing to do with, but you're still put into a situation. It's what you do after you get put into that situation that really accounts for who you are and what makes you a person or the type of person. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of inequality going on right now. I completely do understand. Like, I see it. And there is a massive difference in wealth generation from one individual to another. I also see that. Now, and I also do understand that no two people have the same opportunities as another person might, but that doesn't mean you can't get there. Everybody, and see, here's the thing: you are generally a product of your environment. That's also not gonna lie, but you can bring yourself out of it. I see people do it all the time. Hell, I did it. I grew up in a little podunk town out in the middle of nowhere, population of 1,500 with a graduating class of maybe like 120. A lot of the people that I grew up with are still in that same little town doing the same things that their parents and everybody else did. I forced myself out. And it's not like I was wealthy at that time. My parents were doing, I mean, my family was hurting around that time, but I still forced myself out. Now, again, everybody may not have the same opportunities or have made the same decisions to do the same things, but they do have the ability to do those things and better themselves. It just depends on how you decide to do it. You can sit back and you can point the finger and complain, or you can do something about it. At the end of the day, here's the thing: nobody is going to care if you succeed or fail, apart from the people that are within your inner circle, and whoever that might be. It might be friends, it might be family, whoever else. But you are responsible for your own success. I do wholeheartedly believe that. And I'm not saying that you need the government to step in. Yeah, I'm not saying that you need Big Brother to step in. A lot of those decisions and a lot of the things you do after a problem occurs defines who you are. That's what I'm saying.
Here's a counter. I'll go back to where you grew up and that people are still there. You said you forced yourself out. Here's a question. The people who are there, do they like being there?
Some do.
Because, okay, so then I would say that's an unfair comparison to say you forcing your way out probably has to do with how you felt about being in that town and the opportunities or the non-opportunities that were there.
No,
Because the word says force. When you said force, I was like, well, where does that come from? Because you said you're forced your way out.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is like, if you want change, you're responsible for it. That's what I'm saying. And there are a lot of people that, are still sitting there. And okay, here's the other thing. And here's another caveat to it. You may not know how. Go ask for help from people that did it. Whatever you're trying to do, you can ask. And you might get 100 no's before you get that one yes. But you got to put in the effort to even get that far. And you're going to make a lot of mistakes in your life. But like, that's the other problem is people are so afraid of making mistakes. And a lot of it has to do with being penalized for making a mistake. There is no opportunity to learn from what you just screwed up on. I'm not talking about, go break a bunch of laws and okay, that's a mistake. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying that like we live in this world of mindset of being perfect all the time, being perfect around your friends, being perfect around your family, being perfect around like hell, your significant other, your society. Allow yourself to make mistakes, but we don't allow ourselves that. Then there's fear of, well, what if I fail? Okay, who gives a shit? Fail. You learn from it. Move to the next one. Keep trying.
Right.
That mindset has changed drastically, and it's turned more into gimme versus I'm gonna go fail and I don't care if I fail and I'm gonna keep doing it and I'm gonna keep doing it and I'm gonna keep doing it. That's part of the, like you mentioned, the American dream a little while ago. That's part of it. You're gonna fail 9 times out of 10, but at that one time that you do actually succeed, you're gonna see the fruits of that labor.
I want to say, I do believe strongly not everyone has the same opportunities.
They
They
don't.
really don't. Not everybody is even remotely in a position to know where to learn from it. If you don't know where to turn, then you're basically in kind of an abyss of, well, what do I do? So that,
I mean,
so when I think about equity and equality, and I've heard this a lot throughout my life, that people say, well, everybody has the opportunity for success. Okay, really? Well, I always look at who says that.
yeah, but that success, here's the other piece. Success is defined by what you're looking for.
Right.
Success, it shouldn't be defined by Joe Schmo across the pond. He did all of that, so I deserve to be able to do the same types of things.
I know comparison is the thief of joy. I agree with that. But when we're talking about how people can pull themselves up, or what you were saying, people feeling like they've been wronged or not heard, I think it can be easy to say that people have opportunities, that opportunities are available to them without, and I'm just go with me for a
Yeah.
second. And I'm saying that so many people believe that, oh, well, you have opportunities are available to you. You can go and do this. You don't have to feel bad about what you've done or where you've come from. There are opportunities available. A lot of people who say that, that's because they've had privilege and opportunity that are easily available to them. It's hard to say that if you've never experienced the counter. There are so many people that will say, well, you know what? I like what you're doing. Come along. I'll sponsor you. That doesn't happen for everybody. So I understand, and I don't come against them when they're feeling down. They don't feel like they have opportunities available to them, or the deck is stacked against them. And there's that saying, that the saying that it's hard to pull yourself up from your bootstraps when you don't have any boots. There's so much that exists. It can be challenging for a lot of people because they don't have any frame of reference. One of the things that I think about, again, my pandemic reference per episode, is when we were all called to shelter in place and kids were called to work from home. I mean, go to school from home. They were at home and they were working. It was easy to think that, oh, well, yeah, kids can work from home. They have the internet. Guess what? Not all kids had access to the internet. Something
Yeah.
that simple. But for a lot of people, they weren't even aware of it, with limitations on public transportation, and that a lot of people didn't even have access to food because they were living in a food desert. This is where I talk about equity and equality and how are things shared equitably, because it's not always that way, and the challenges that come with so many people, and the struggles and challenges of what people have to do to even get a minute amount of what someone else has. And it's not a comparison, but when we're talking about that balance, it can be a struggle for a lot of people, just based on where they live, and the resources that are available to them, are better yet not.
It's true. But here's the other thing. When you're put on this planet as a baby, again, not all babies are put in the same environment. Not all babies have the same type of care and all this other stuff. You're forced to learn everything. And again, you're a product of your environment, correct? So what you're picking up as you're growing is what you become eventually. Now, to change that atmosphere, it's very, very difficult. But you see people do it all the time. See, okay, I don't want to get into Hinduism and all this other stuff, but like there's a belief that you are far capable than what you give yourself credit for. When situations become dire and in those situations where you feel like you don't have an outlet, you don't have an avenue, is sometimes where you figure out what you're meant to be. You get what I'm saying? And it's just it's a spiritual standpoint, but at the same time, you can either do one of two things. You can jump out and start complaining about your situation, or again, you can do something about it. And there's always something you can do something about it. Like, look, I mean, even right now, it's been 8 months since we like got lost our jobs. And when I first came on and all this stuff was going on, I was pissed. And I was in some kind of mindset, like, why can't I get this? And why is somebody looking at me? And why isn't like somebody looking at my resume and all this other stuff? Now I'm kind of just at a point where like, okay, I'm in this spot. I got to figure out and dig myself out of it because nobody's going to get me out of it. But I'm not out there complaining. I know the situation that I'm in. And so like eventually I'll get myself out. I just don't know how or what. Now I'm in that position of what you're talking about. There's a lot of people in that position that you're talking about right now. But this is what's going to make or break them, like 100%. And if you give up and then you just come out and you start saying, well, why doesn't that person have the same? Why didn't I get this? And why didn't I do that? And why is this? And why am I not being helped? Well, a lot of those decisions that you made prior are actually coming into play right now. It's in this world and in this society, nobody's just going to give you a handout, even though you might want it. You might get a lot of attention. And that's the other thing is like this philosophy of bad press is still press is bullshit. Excuse my language.
I talked with Claire about that on our episode 26, I think.
Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to say is like what you do, and this is what I've always said, is your actions matter. You may not have the same opportunity as the person sitting right next to you, but you can do what you can with the opportunities that are presented to you. And you who knows if you might learn something that the other person doesn't, and you might get further ahead because of the things that you've learned.
If opportunities are presented to you, I know
they might be. You're just not seeing them though,
or it might not, and you're aware that it's not. You said no one will give you a handout. No one will give you a handout.
The basic necessity.
However, a lot of people have opportunities to a hand up, and there are people who do get a handout. We can say the deck isn't stacked against, but for some people, they feel like it is because of circumstances. And to bring yourself out of that, we can go back to May and some of the things we talked about with depression and mental health. It's easy to say you should be able to pull yourself out of it. That is bullshit.
Hard.
It's bullshit. And so if we have it from a mental standpoint, how do we think from a physical standpoint that it's available to us? And then some people have the hardest time just getting the basic needs. So many people think that, oh, you shouldn't be complaining. That's on you. But some things aren't.
Well, hold on. Let's take a step back. The basic necessities of living. Yes, I do think that everybody deserves that. Food, shelter, right? Those types of things. Anything more than that, though, that's on you.
Like what? What's the other thing? From Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I love to reference. Of the pyramid, the bottom line is the psychological needs. That's air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing.
Yeah.
Those are the psychological needs. The next level is safety needs. And that's personal security, employment, resources, health.
None of those are promised.
So safety.
That has never been promised.
Where's the promise coming from? Where's the promise coming from? Shelter is not promised either. Food is not promised either. But we're talking about the hierarchy of needs, what a person needs, not what's promised.
True. But here's the thing, like in the history of mankind, that second tier has never been like, okay, you're just going to get this because you exist.
Well, besides air, water wasn't even promised.
I get it, but I'm saying to exist, you need that first tier. You absolutely need that first tier to exist. The second tier is not.
You're saying the second tier, okay, the first tier, you need it to exist.
To live, yes, to be alive.
And the second tier, you don't need to be alive?
No, it's not that's
that's the safety one. You need safety to be alive. You need personal security to be alive. You need resources to be alive.
See, no, you don't.
Okay, please tell me. Why do you not need resources to be alive?
It depends on what you're talking about. Food, if you're talking about food, water, air, those are also resources. But if you define resources, what kind of
Mm,
resources? Because there's hundreds of millions of people out in, like, let's just say Africa that are doing just that. There's people in African tribes. There's people out in, like, even smaller tribes out in, like, coast of nowhere.
that don't have
We've been told,
resources?
no, they don't. These guys are out there running around killing baboons and stuff like that. Limited resources on food. They don't have any of this stuff. Here's the thing. Society has told us over and over and over again that if you want to be something, this is what you need. And it keeps pushing further and further, higher and higher. Like, did you know that currently, another statistic that's been pushed out, the average American feels that they need $233,000 a year to survive? That makes absolutely no sense. A lot of the standards that we're actually holding for ourselves right now, it's not driven by our own basic needs or our own necessities. It's being driven by what other people in, like, parts of society and all this other stuff that social media is telling us that we need. Now, the individuals that don't have basic shelter, the people that don't have food on a daily basis, the people that are struggling to just live, yes, increase their standard of living. But the individuals that aren't willing to do anything for, and there's a whole shitload of them. There's a lot of people like that that don't want to necessarily put in the effort and put in the work to get to the next level, that are just saying, I deserve to be at the next level. Why? Because again, society is saying this is what we need. The transfer of information is faster than anything else that we have right now, but it's not information that's conducive to our success. And it's forcing people to believe that they need to be at a higher tier without actually putting a lot of the effort in just because they exist. That's what I'm saying. The American standard right now, and I'm, excuse me if somebody has a different opinion, but a lot of people in this country right now don't understand what's happening across the pond and other parts of the world, because
Oh,
all
I
we're
agree.
looking at it is from a narrow perspective and saying this is it.
Well, and that's always been the case for a lot of people here in the US, just because there's so much stuff that happens here. It is difficult to even have capacity. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we're not talking about is the capacity for something else. You talk against social media quite a bit, but I want to say, and I'm not pro or against social media because I see the benefits and then I see the downfalls. But the one thing that social media has done is inform a lot of people about a lot of things that have gone on in communities around the world that they were never made aware of.
So
So there's
if we're going to talk about equality and inclusion and things like that, we shouldn't just look at it from a narrow perspective of what this country is going through. Look at it from a worldwide perspective. There's a whole lot of people in other parts of the world that, okay, perfect example. I have relatives that are still in India and things like that that are not necessarily in the greatest of shape and things like that, but they're happy. And I'll tell you
mm,
why. When they hear about some of the problems that are going on over here, there's like they're not those aren't real problems. The problems that are created. If we wanted to know what real problems were, I've traveled, right? And when you see people having to take buckets to go to a river to get drinking water, and you look at this and you know in your mind that you would never drink that shit in the first place, or tribes out in Africa and tribes out in other parts of Asia and things like that that are having to go fish and hunt, like those people don't have electricity, or they might have electricity for 2 to 4 hours out of the day. When you see
mm.
stuff like that, it puts things into perspective. A lot of the problems that we have here are self-inflicted and created.
So here's my question. Let me
Mm-hmm.
turn this around. I'm not being flippant with that. It's more being flippant with you on this. Those real problems that you're talking about, how do they bring themselves out of it?
That's what I'm trying to say. Well, how do they bring themselves out of it?
Mhm.
They don't.
Because
Part of
here's the
it.
thing.
Part of
When
it
we're
is
talking
here's the
about,
thing. It's about our perspective. To them, that's not necessarily a problem. That's just their standard of living. They don't
okay,
know any better. We do. It's based on perspective.
right, which is what I was talking about earlier, that
Yeah.
it's one thing for some people to say, "Oh, we can talk about those problems are true. Those are their standard of living." But then we
Hmm.
have here, and that's what I was talking about before. Some people, they don't have the access to the opportunities like so many other people. It's very much the same thing. It's just different degrees of what those problems are. They're saying, y'all are griping about the wrong things. But there are people here that talk about other people here who don't have a standard of living that's equal to somebody else, and they're saying, oh, you're griping about the wrong things. It is perspective, but it's still that same level or a similar level. It's just the degree of what that level is. Granted, yes, people here may or may not have electricity in some places.
Mhm.
But when I was referencing the kids who didn't have access to the internet, for other people who never had access to the internet, that's like, oh, that's a real world problem. But for them here, based on the standard that's set here, it is a problem.
Who set the standard, though? That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah, that's part of it as well. Who sets the standard, and also who is setting the standard of what's considered equal and equitable, and how everybody has the opportunity to reach something, but that's not necessarily the case, is what I'm saying. A
But what are
lot
you
of how
trying to
we,
reach, though? That's what I'm trying to say.
based on what we've talked about, if we're talking about a standard of living, if we're talking about opportunities, if we're talking about moving out of poverty, not everybody has access to that in the same way. That was my point, and that's where we started out this conversation talking. Well, we started out the conversation talking about a lot of stuff, but talking about socialism versus capitalism, what's available and what's the opportunity, what's shared equally. So, what did you think? There are so many factors that influence our thoughts and worldviews. You can see it in how we all navigate the world, our choices, and how we interact with one another. Remember, this was part one. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss part two. And be sure to check out the episode notes for resources related to what we discussed.